Next speaker is Stephanie Alexander. She's a first-generation working class academic. Stephanie lives in southeastern Ohio and now works as the Director of Academic Support Services at a small college that primarily serves working class students. Today she's sharing the study she undertook as a PhD student, in which she explored whether or not students must give up their working class roots in order to be academic successful in higher education. And I know that this is something that a lot of us are asking the same question. So, Stephanie, are you on?
Yes, I think I am. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. All right, well, hello everyone. I'm Stephanie. Thank you, Lisa, for that wonderful introduction. It's great to be presenting for the Working Class Academics Conference today. And as Lisa said, I'm going to share with you some of my research. This bit in particular deals with the perceptions of white working class males who live in the Appalachian region of the United States. It was in my dissertation study, and I did complete it as part of my requirements for my PhD. So to begin, I want to familiarize you with the Appalachian region itself so you have an idea where it's at. It is a very large, diverse area of 205,000 square miles that runs along the Appalachian Mountain Range in the eastern part of the United States. It touches along 13 of our 50 states. However, only one state, the one that has the star on it right there, West Virginia, is the only state that is fully enclosed within the Appalachian region. It is a state that is very well known for its natural beauty. However, it is also known for having a very large concentration of white poverty, with 94.6% of its population being white. They have about a 19–20% poverty rate. But as far as academic attainment goes, only about 33% obtain an associate degree or higher. And here is our hillbilly. Everyone wanted to see the hillbilly. Okay, so it's a state that's often associated with a very negative stereotype. The uneducated hillbilly who's gun-toting and barefoot, and he's grizzled looking, and he hunts and he moonshines, and he has a he hunts raccoons, and he has a pet possum. You know, very negative type stereotypes. I'm not saying this isn't true. Sometimes you might find someone like this, you know, but for the most part, in reality, West Virginia is actually more accurately coal country. It has a very long historical past as one of the major coal producing regions in the United States. My ancestry came out of the coal fields of West Virginia. Simply put, West Virginia's industry and economic base during the entire 20th century has relied on the production of coal. Now, here's the thing about West Virginia industry. As clean technology has come to the forefront, you can see that there has been less of a demand. And from about the mid-century, you can see the number of coal miners and the coal mining industry itself has been very much so reduced. So from the 1980s forward, and especially with the 1990s Clean Air Act, there has been a dramatic shift for coal mining and for employment in the area from industry to what we call more service sector type employment and jobs. And what this has meant for people who traditionally grew up, became coal miners, had children who grew up, became coal miners, there has been a shift. And what that has meant is a return to school and formal education. So for the older ones who may have to recareer themselves because there have been mine closures or just because of the dwindling opportunities in the coal industry, and for the younger generations, it has meant heading off to college. However, although many do head off to college, very few of these men seem to be finishing. And at the time of my study, the graduation rate at career and technical colleges in the state of West Virginia was between 7–27% for the white Appalachian male. So it was, we weren't seeing a lot of folks finishing up. Now, the issue has not went unnoticed. And in fact, there have been lots of studies to try to understand and see why people aren't being able to finish. And in fact, to help those who are first generation working class students, many of these studies have been undertaken over the years They try to discover that silver bullet that would fix the problem and lead to success for these folks. However, many of the students that they studied were the ones that did not complete their program. So these studies focused on failure. They sought only to identify barriers to student success, and they utilized most often what we call a deficit ideology, where something was missing in the student and the student needed fixed. So I looked at these studies and I was like, I really didn't want to do another study like this. These are my people, I didn't want to take this approach. So what I did was I took a different approach, and I used what's considered an appreciative inquiry model. And I actually interviewed participants who had finished their programs of study, and I sought to identify their supports from their lives that they felt were instrumental in helping them finish. And I also decided I would ask what they, or how they defined academic success, because sometimes one person's definition is not necessarily the same as another's. So I did a lot of reading, and just to give you an overview of what I kind of explored, I've made this slide. So I framed my study using Bourdieu's ideas around cultural capital and social reproduction, and Bernstein's ideas about linguistic codes. I also tossed in a little of Gramsci's thoughts about hegemony and Freire's class consciousness, as well as included multiple other relevant areas that I felt pertained to the demographic I had chosen to study. And I have those all listed there. Social class in the US, social mobility, class consciousness, social stratification in US education system. Unless you're living here in the United States, you might not realize that we actually do have a very socially stratified education system here. That's not real apparent on the surface, but it underlies with a lot of stratification. Psychological capital and self-efficacy, working class identity formation, the working class in education in the US, whiteness with boundary theory and otherness, Appalachian cultural traits. I am of that culture. There are certain traits that have been attached to us, some which are true, some which aren't so true. And West Virginia as a whole, I looked at, but primarily their industry and their economic sectors. So what I was primarily looking for in my study was how education functions to serve as a mechanism for social reproduction in the United States. In the US, a shift occurred in higher education after World War II. Prior to that time, higher education was primarily for the privileged due to cost. But with the GI Bill after World War II, higher education became very attainable to the working class, or rather those who had served in the military during World War II. In the 1970s, with the advent of federal financial aid programs and student loan systems, more working class students were able to enter higher ed. And today in the US, we have many institutions, and I work at one, that offer what is known as open enrollment, where just about anyone breathing and with a pulse can enroll for classes. On the surface, this makes higher ed in the US look like it's very accessible. But in actuality, because higher ed is still set up systemically to the advantage of those from the middle class, it just sets most working class students up for failure. So there's kind of the attitude that, yeah, you can all come, but we're going to still keep it running like it used to be traditionally. So there's a bit of a contradiction there. A lot of the ideology around student success centers on learning to adapt to survive, and that's something that I study. So taking all these things into consideration, my biggest question became, do you really have to leave your roots behind in order to be academically successful? And so I formed these as my research questions. First, I wanted to know how the men define success, how they perceive their past and present academic successes, and most importantly, I wanted to know what aspects of their lives they had felt contributed to their academic success. These were the 8 men. You can see that I had a bit of a range. You will also see a tend towards 30s and 40s here. These were a lot of men who were recareering themselves. They had been in industry, coal mining industry. They were coming back, becoming more in the service sector, physical therapy assistants, those kind of things. So I asked them in in-depth interviews, and I interviewed 8, and they represented, there were 10 community colleges in West Virginia at that time, and they represented 7 of them. And here's what I found. So their definitions of academic success all stayed very deeply rooted in working class thought, meaning that educational value was associated with the ability to practically apply their skills and knowledge that they obtained. So even though they got the credential, they were more concerned with how am I going to, you know, I want the proficiency, you know, I want the performance piece, not just having a piece of paper, but what the abilities that came along with that. So this was very significant because it illustrates their tie to the working class and the production of labor. So if you understand Marxism and how working class and labor work, that's kind of what I saw there was that thread. They still saw themselves as worker, you know, as the worker rather than the academic. Their perceptions were equally interesting. All illustrated a degree of psychological capital as well as self-efficacy, and this meant they were able to see beyond what they currently were and envision what they could be, and they held that belief within themselves that it was actually achievable and doable. They also displayed a deeper appreciation for a college education, although it was primarily tied to the ability to perform a task to a higher proficiency and economically benefit from that. But as a result, they had developed a higher educational aspect that they pushed along onto their children, and they were expecting their own children to follow in their footsteps. And finally, this was probably one of the most interesting. The aspects of their lives that they attributed to their success were also the very ones that the ones who had failed attributed to their failures. So this was interesting. Job security and economics. Most of the men were there, you know, plugging away at a degree, trying to get a degree, but they were also working a part-time job. And it was that part-time job that drove them to finish. It was, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life for a low wage. I want to get a better paying job. Whereas the ones that had failed would often say, I got to work, I can't do it. And they would prioritize their part-time job over getting out of the part-time job. So the job security and economics was something that was common. Family support. We are a big family-oriented culture. My uncle's grandparent that, you know, third cousin twice removed is having surgery, and I'm going to go to the hospital and be with them. So we have this huge support family network that at times is a burden and a weight around our neck. So where the ones that had failed had let family pull them down, these had let family elevate them, which is very interesting. It was a different dynamic. They had a high degree of self-reliance. They knew they could do it. This often destroys students because they will not come in and get academic support when they need it, tutoring help, example. They think they can do it without help, and they try to do it without help. These guys were self-reliant, but they had also recognized the fact that they could accept help and that it would be all right. And for those who had served in the military, and I have asterisks on the slide before the ones that had served in the military, the discipline that they had developed while in military service, they said helped them be more disciplined to getting their academic work done and to see value in it. Other items that contributed was at some point along the way, except for one of the interviewees, they had developed the love of learning. They had transformed from just doing it because I have to I actually love this because I can apply this, you know, and it would give me an economic benefit. So this love of learning, and they wanted to learn. They had spousal interdependence, which means they viewed their spouse as an equal partner, and they depended on their spouse as much as their spouse depended on them. And then the new expectations that we saw were the evolution of that thought where the working class sometimes thinks, I want my better for my children. You know, the middle class wants to maintain the status quo, whereas the working class says, I want better for my children. This expectation was almost similar to the middle class in that I want this for my children, which is a college education. So it was kind of interesting there to see that evolution. And then many of the personal values that they exhibited were derived from American culture. And they were, the self-efficacy were very well known for being survivors. So a lot of these things, you know, played into that as well. And I thought this quote was very telling. because this was from Peter. He was the youngest one that I interviewed. He was also from the biggest family. He was, and this is not typical in this area, but I thought it was interesting for him. He was the first of his grandparents' 23 grandchildren to earn a college degree, and he was working on his master's. And this was a quote that he said, "I'm working on my master's degree now, but I hope I don't become one of those overeducated people who can't do the job." I know a few of those, and I think we all know a few of those who can't do the job, but they have the degree. So, you know, when I took all this, you know, taking all this into consideration, it's been a few years now, being from the working class myself, I too value that application of knowledge. So I looked at this and I said, so what can I do with this? And what I do is, as a result of my study, I try to apply what I learned through this work in my own work every day. And I work at a small community college with a large number of working class students. And we are now working to redesign the way that our college provides support to students in order to break down those systemic barriers that are sometimes not real clear. For example, instead of attempting to make students college ready and fix them and plug holes that are missing and do these types of things, we're striving to meet students where they are and create a college with processes and a structure. And this is very Freerian, but we're changing our structure of the college itself when we onboard students so that we are more student ready. And that way we can help the students that we serve more fully. And I thank you for listening.
So, thank you so much for that, Stephanie. I don't know if you've been looking at the chat, but I definitely have. And there are many British people in the chat which are really identifying with your research and also your comments, particularly around the post-industrial areas in the UK. And we do have a question that I hope you'd like to answer. It's from Sue Bentley, and she's interested in your view on community college. And perhaps, and I think we sort of mentioned it earlier on this morning about spaces which are mostly working class and the difference between perhaps a community college and then a university. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that.
So what was your specific question? My thoughts about community colleges, like their role or their purpose or how we use them in the United States?
Well, I suppose it's interested in views on community college versus the university.
Well, that's interesting because I have to confess something. I actually work at an institution. If you look at my title slide that introduces me, I work at an institution that is a combined university, four-year private university in the United States, as well as a public community college. So what we do here is we actually have the first 2 years, if you're a local student, you get a community college rate, okay? And then the third and fourth year, you get bumped up to the private university rate, which is astronomical. But it's interesting because we are like the only institution in the United States that does that. But the role of the community colleges in the United States varies. I think some states see them as more of a junior college or a cheaper start type thing or a technical training with an associate degree, certificate program. However, other states view them more as workforce development. And West Virginia, which was where my study was done, because I was working in West Virginia at a community college at that time in the state of West Virginia, we had been given the absolute goal of producing workforce. You know, that was our goal, was the 2-year associate or a 1-year certificate program. I think community colleges in the state of Ohio, where I now work, we like to view our community colleges as a transitional, you know, we have a lot of students that come in and take transfer model, or they'll do 2 years of gen eds and then transfer to university. So we see ours a little bit differently. So I think it's a state-by-state thing in the United States. Personally, I think that you can get a good taste at a community college and you might end up in a 4-year university somewhere. All of the men that I interviewed in my study had started off at a community college. They had gotten a degree or a certificate first before they went on through to higher ed. Personally, I went to a public university first. So I didn't have the community college experience, but a lot of people do. 3 of my 4 children actually have had a community college experience. I have had, and one of my 4 children has, well, 2 of them actually, she went on, but they both got degrees from. So to us, a community college is something that is local, that is a little bit less, and it does offer those open enrollment situations. But we're all very competitive with one another. Some of the universities offer that too, so.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to go on now to Elaine. But again, I think we're going to have some time at the end for more general debate, but also Sahil is back with us now, so I think he might want to have a few minutes after Elaine as well.